Okay, today we're diving into a massive financial mystery. It's the story of how the incredible wealth of one nation seems to have just vanished into the financial system of another. Let's follow the money.
I mean, just look at this number. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around it. $730 billion. According to a study from the Catholic University of Angola, that's how much of the country's oil revenue was diverted or just disappeared between 2002 and 2015. That's a staggering 87% of the total.
So you have to ask, right? How does that much money just vanish? Well, the sources we looked at suggest this wasn't some random string of thefts. No. It was a highly organized international system, what they call an architecture of corruption. And we're going to walk through that very architecture step by step. All right, so part one, how did this even happen? The whole thing kicks off in Angola. And this wasn't a clumsy smash and grab heist. The system for siphoning off all this wealth was actually built right into the country's most powerful institutions.
And that brings us to this key idea, institutional corruption. It's a fancy term, but what it really means is that the corruption wasn't just a bug in the system, it was the system. It was how things were designed to work. And the main engine for all of this? Angola's state oil company, Sonangol. So, how do they pull it off? The sources lay out this pretty slick three-step process they call the Sonangol method. First, Sonangol would hand out these massively inflated contracts to multinational companies. Step two, those companies would then make payments to offshore shell companies, in places like Panama. And then bam, step three, that money gets wired directly into the private bank accounts of powerful Angolan figures. It was a clean, simple, and perfect way to turn public oil money into private fortunes.
Okay, so we know where the money came from. The next big question is, where did it all go? And that's where Portugal comes into the picture, allegedly playing the role of a massive money pipeline.
The sources basically describe Portugal as a giant financial laundry. It was the #1 destination for bank transfers coming out of Angola. And get this, audits of European banks, including Portuguese ones, found that they just weren't applying the basic anti-money laundering rules. They also use special tax havens like Madeira to make it super hard to tell who actually owned what. We're talking about at least 296 million euros that got moved irregularly into the EU through these channels alone.
And this is the part that's really wild. The failure to stop this flow of money wasn't just some mistake or, a bit of negligence. The sources are really clear on this. They call it institutional complicity. That suggests this wasn't an accident. It was a systematic, almost willful choice to look the other way, which is what made the whole thing possible. Now, a system this huge, moving this much cash across 2 continents, it doesn't just happen. It needs protection. And that protection, according to the sources, came from what they call a strategic alliance between the political and financial power players in both Angola and Portugal. And you don't even have to take my word for it. Just listen to this quote. When the former Prime Minister of Portugal, Antonio Costa, was asked about returning the money, he said this: "We will not return the money of the Angolans if it will harm the economic and financial development of Portugal." Wow. I mean, that just lays it all out there, right? It suggests that keeping this money was actually seen as being in Portugal's national economic interest. And this protection allegedly went all the way up to the justice system. Take this one case from the source material. Angola's former vice president, Manuel Vicente, was accused of paying a bribe, a 760,000 euro bribe, to a Portuguese prosecutor. And what happened? The investigations into Vicente's finances just went away.
So we've seen the machine and how it works, but there's a real-world cost to all of this, a human price. Let's look at the absolutely devastating impact this had on the people of Angola.
I mean, this is just heartbreaking. While all those billions were flying around the globe, extreme poverty back in Angola just exploded. We're talking a jump from 6.4 million people to a projected 11.6 million in less than a decade. That's an 82% increase, an absolute catastrophe. And this chart, it paints an even bigger, grimmer picture. Look at that. Over half the population, 51.1%, is living in what's called multidimensional poverty. That means they're struggling with basic health, education, and living standards all at the same time. A nation's wealth was sitting in offshore accounts while its people had next to nothing.
And to make matters worse, the whole economic relationship between the two countries just keeps this cycle going. Angola sends out cheap raw materials, right? And then it has to import expensive manufactured goods from Portugal. The sources call this a colonial dynamic. It's a setup that basically keeps Angola dependent and stops it from building its own economy.
So here's the bottom line. When you step back and look at all the pieces, the corruption inside Sonangol, the money laundering in Portugal, the political protection, the lopsided economy, you realize something really important. This wasn't just a bunch of people committing crimes. This was a system, a fully functional machine designed for one purpose: to move an entire nation's wealth into private hands. And that leaves us with this one massive, difficult question. We've just walked through this architecture of absence, a story of money that should have built schools and hospitals, but instead just disappeared. So, if the system itself is the crime, where on earth do you even start to look for justice?